Yes.
I can pretend to be a panelist.
Do you guys want to come up?
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm gonna go there.
Okay, well now, and then I think,
I'll leave.
is Dr. Azell still here? Is that your group? Oh, that's your group, okay, then we're all good. Okay, so real fast, if the computer dies, if the computer goes down, then I will come back up and quietly put it out. But for Helena's, it's right here, so you just pull it up.
I'll do the one that should be clicking out.
I'm gonna give her this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's exactly two women speaking.
And then,
You come to school?
he's my student.
We do.
Wait, just a question, what do we mean by Frankenstein and its influence? Like, what influenced Frankenstein, or is it just like, that's just broad?
Yeah, well, part of what what he's talking about Plutarch's lives, but also like the Frankenstein itself, and then the language narrative. So like part of Frankenstein and the things
Okay,
that made it become what it was.
okay.
Does that make sense?
There's also nobody in there. I just had to.
Do you guys need water or anything? Nathan, do you need any water? I have water.
My husband.
And just so you know, this is for you. This is a little bit of what he's okay for the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Should be all set up. Okay.
Okay.
Impart upon us your wisdom.
Okay, so, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our panel. I'm the chair, my name is Winston Breebach. Our topic is Frankenstein and its influences, and we can take that as broadly as anything that helped make Frankenstein become Frankenstein. So, our first speaker is Pierre-Louis Delbar. He is a second-year undergraduate student majoring in international studies. His presentation, Duality in Frankenstein, Separating Monster and Man, covers duality and the impact that secrecy has throughout Frankenstein. Note, this is a title change from Frankenstein's Mirror.
Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to share my close reading today with all of you, specifically in regard to the role that secrecy plays in the story and individuality of Dr. Victor Frankenstein and the creature. I'd like to start with a brief summary of the events in the book, before moving on to my three main points, consisting of the duality of the characters exhibit, the impact of society on their secrecy, and the relationship of secrecy with their downfall. Frankenstein was written in 1818 and is set in the late 18th century. Mary Shelley knew Europe in a time of great turmoil as the aftershocks of French Revolution and Industrial Revolution of the late 18th century shook the political and economic atmosphere of England. Following these revolutions came a rising threat of an increasingly dominant French superpower under the rule of Napoleon and the battles waged across Europe. The romantic themes of Frankenstein reflect this revolutionary time as we see the creature attempt to define himself in an unwelcoming society. The story is narrated entirely through Walton, an explorer trekking to the North Pole, as Victor Frankenstein recounts the events leading up to him being stranded in an Arctic desert, hot on the trail of his creation. We begin with Victor's youth and receive a backstory of his education and how he created the creature. After reanimating the creature, Victor flees, abandoning his creation and falling ill due to the shock of the experience. When he recuperates, he finds out that his little brother, William, has been killed and thus returns home. Once there, he sees the creature in the distance and knows that it was him who had killed his brother and who had killed William, Justine is then accused of murdering William and stands trial, and despite knowing who the true murderer is, Victor remains silent throughout the ordeal. Later, while Frankenstein is out on a solitary excursion, he is approached by the monster who wishes to talk to him. Despite Victor's hesitation, he gives in and listens to the creature's tale. The creature gives him his side of the story and details his journey and everything that he had to discover for himself. This backstory on the creature is when we as the reader see him interact with society the most, as every town he is discovered in chases him away. Through the Delacies, he learns language and culture before being driven off by the son, Felix, after he attempts to gain sympathy from the blind old head of the house. He then wanders and stumbles upon William Frankenstein, upon which, finding out the boy's parentage, decides to kill him and frame Justine for his actions. We are then brought back to the present, in which the creature demands that Frankenstein create another being like him to act as his mate. Victor agrees to this, but destroys his work before completing it, prompting the creature to threaten him by letting him know that he'd be with Frankenstein on his wedding night. Victor sails out at night and disposes of the bride's body and falls asleep in the boat. Upon waking up on the shore, he is apprehended by the authorities as he is accused of having strangled Clerval, his friend. Victor falls ill again and is nursed back to health while in custody before being released after it was found that he did not in fact kill Clerval. He then returns home and marries Elizabeth, but remains worried as he believes the creature will follow through on his threat to kill him. That night, Victor stands guard outside waiting for the creature to show up. However, the creature kills Elizabeth rather than Victor. Shortly after, the Frankenstein patriarch passes away due to grief, leaving Victor truly alone as he has lost everybody that he cares for. After having told his story to Walton, Victor dies, and the creature climbs aboard the ship to pay a final farewell to his creator before leaving into the icy distance, having implied that he would destroy himself. After this encounter, Walton decides to return home, having seen firsthand the destruction caused by unchecked ambition. This segues into my first point, highlighting the duality of creation and creator. Milton, Plutarch, and Goethe have all influenced Frankenstein in various ways. The structure of Frankenstein particularly follows a style similar to Plutarch's Lives. Plutarch's magnum opus, Lives, directly compares a multitude of prominent Greek and Roman figures and is one of the 3 books that the creature reads while at the DeLacy's cottage. Throughout Frankenstein, characters such as Walton, Frankenstein, and the creature are often contrasted in a fashion similar to Lives. Walton and Frankenstein both share great ambitions and an intense desire for glory and recognition for their breakthroughs. In a letter to his sister, Walton writes that one cannot contest the inestimable benefit which he shall confer on all mankind to the last generation by discovering a passage near the pole. Later, when Victor narrates his tale, his desire to create a new species that would bless him as its creator and source convinced him to follow through with his attempt at reanimating the corpse that would become the creature. Frankenstein had already made his grave error before meeting Walton, and thus warns him that he seeks for knowledge and wisdom, as Victor himself once had, and Victor ardently hopes that the gratification of Walton's wishes may not be a serpent to sting him, as Victor's has been. Comparisons such as these highlight the impact of Lives on Mary Shelley's writing style. However, the most important parallels drawn in the book are those between creator and creation. The debate often revolves around which is the monster, Frankenstein or the creature, but I argue that neither are monsters, as they exhibit traditionally good and evil traits, and thus stand in a complex gray moral ground. One such good trait manifests through natural themes, a common base of romantic literature used to illustrate a feeling of escapism. The sublimity of nature that is found in Frankenstein enamors both Dr. Frankenstein and the creature in similar ways. After Justine's execution, Frankenstein falls into a depression and finds solace in traveling through the Rhine with Clerval, where Frankenstein exclaims that, even I, depressed in mind and continually agitated by gloomy feelings, was pleased. Frankenstein's trips to nature reflects the romantic notion of escapism, in which the individual retreats from the harsh realities of their lives to find peace in natural beauty. The creature found a similar joy in the turning of winter into spring, even as he dwelt on the condition of his wretched existence. As he explains his life to his creator, the creature recalls how terrified he was when he viewed himself in a transparent pool. But later, the creature seemed hopeful as he spoke of the changing of winter and how it surprised him that what before was desert and gloomy should now bloom with the most beautiful flowers. Nature affects Frankenstein and the creature in a similar way by lifting Frankenstein out of his depression and by elevating the creature's spirits through the enchanting appearance of nature and blotting the past from the creature's memory. This similarity makes the creature seem less like an unfeeling, brutish monster and more like a man with a sensibility towards the natural world. This brings the Frankenstein and the creature closer together. A traditional evil trait common to both characters and that is often brought up when discussing the true monster of Frankenstein is that Victor and the creature both share a desire to exact vengeance against one another. Frankenstein wants the creature dead to avenge his family and to rid the world of what he considers a monstrosity, and the creature wants Frankenstein dead for abandoning him in a hostile world and for refusing to create a mate for him. The creature's first killing is of William, which after he proclaimed that he was Mr. Frankenstein's son, the creature told the boy that he belonged to his enemy, towards whom he had sworn eternal revenge, and that William shall be his first victim. This murder would also lead to Justine's death, as the creature framed her for his crime and incites Frankenstein to want revenge against the creature. After Justine's death, Frankenstein reflected on the creature's crimes and malice, and when he did, his hatred and revenge burst all bounds of moderation, which made Frankenstein wish to avenge the deaths of both William and Justine. A direct parallel that Mary Shelley draws between Frankenstein and the creature is that their need for vengeance led them both to a lonely and miserable end, as Frankenstein discards the creature's mate, and the creature kills Elizabeth out of spite. On the surface, destroying each other's loved ones may appear nothing more than a simple act of intense hatred for one another. However, the heart of this act lies within the human need for love, a good trait of romantic literature, or a trait that's considered good in romantic literature. Both Frankenstein and the creature exhibit a strong need for love in close personal relationships, demonstrated by the creature's constant attempts to gain acceptance from society and his creator, and by Victor's reaction after losing those close to him. Victor's creation describes himself as having good dispositions, and that his life has been hitherto, and in some degree, beneficial. The creature tells Victor that where people ought to see a feeling and kind friend, they behold only a detestable monster. The creature does not actively hate humans without reason. He simply cannot receive the love and companionship that he requires. The creature's demands for a companion highlight this need, as he is alone and miserable. Man will not associate with him, but one as deformed and horrible as himself would not deny herself to him. Before this request, the creature had been chased away by all who had encountered him, and thus led him to lose hope in finding companionship among men. Similarly to the creature, Victor's complete loss of hope after all his loved ones have died demonstrates that what he truly cared for most was his friends and family. When we strip Victor Frankenstein of his outer facade as an egotistical scientist with a god complex, we find that his true motivation to live did not lie in science, but in his familial ties, as he completely resolves himself to destroy the creature only after he has lost everyone that he valued. My next section, Secrecy in Society, explains the secrecy that pervades Frankenstein stems from the struggle that both main characters face, as they must hide aspects of themselves from society. Both creator and creation need to retain secrets from society, although the reasons for their secrecy differ. Comparing why Dr. Frankenstein must keep his sin of creating a living being from dead flesh a secret, and the reason for which the creature must endure his secretive lifestyle, helps us understand the impact that society has on each character's secrecy. Victor must hide his crime against nature from society at the risk of being ostracized. The fear of a lashback from society in reaction to a secret is a main reason why Victor would not tell the court who truly murdered William, as he believed his declaration would be considered as the ravings of a madman, which proved not to be an irrational fear, as after Elizabeth's murder, Victor breaks his secret and recounts his story to a magistrate, but rather than accepting his story as fact, the magistrate endeavored to soothe Victor as a nurse would a child, and reverted to his tale as the effects of delirium. Interestingly, the meaning of the word secret shifts throughout the text, from initially referring to the secret knowledge which allowed Victor to resurrect a dead being, before transitioning to refer explicitly to the creature. As Frankenstein details his education to Walton, it is clear that he views science as a secretive operation, where the goal is to find the secret and then closely guard it. Frankenstein alludes to his discovery as an astonishing secret, and makes it clear that the object of his obsession would be known only to himself. This secret would lead him to infuse a spark of being into the lifeless, and thus commit a taboo crime against nature. Fear of the societal reactions that his secret would elicit motivated Victor to not reveal his unnatural deed to anyone. When tracking the use of the word secret throughout the text, I found that it is never used again after Elizabeth's death, when Frankenstein essentially cuts ties with society and embarks on a continent-wide hunt for his creation. The secret that Victor harbored for so long no longer matters, as he has lost every tie that he has with society, and the text reflects that separation and the importance that society had on Victor's secrecy, as Mary Shelley does not use the word secret after his departure from civilization. The creature must hide in a much more literal sense than his creator, as his image alone makes him an outcast from society. Thus, the creature's secrecy is to keep himself secret, or face the wrath of men who do not understand him. Unlike his creator, the creature's secretive lifestyle did not result from an infraction against man's laws or taboos, but from his own state of being. When he had tried to interact with the DeLacy's in the open, Felix, the son, darted forward and dashed the creature to the ground and struck him violently with a stick. The creature had not harmed anybody while at the DeLacy's residence or done anything deserving of a beating, but he was beaten nonetheless because of his monstrous appearance. The creature's secret evolves in complexity as he eventually commits crimes against society through his murders. Logically, this would mean that the creature would have to adopt the secret of his criminal deeds along with its pre-existing secret of simply appearing monstrous to mankind. However, as the creature is already disconnected from society by being forced into a constant state of hiding, his criminal deeds did not matter, as he would be judged as a monster based solely off of his appearance. By inheriting an original sin, which is his appearance, for which he must hide and separate himself completely from society, the creature cannot accumulate more reasons to resolve to secrecy, as he must already hide every aspect of his being. This contrasts with the constant secret that Victor harbors, as he has only one error in his deed that remains his only secret throughout the story. While initially, only Frankenstein deserved his sentence to silence and isolation, as the creature had no control over how it was created, and thus received an unjust reason to hide, through the creature's criminal actions, his secrecy became merited as well. My next section is about secrecy and hamartia. In this section, I explain how a victor's and the creature's hamartia, or fatal flaw, interacts with their secrecy and serves to juxtapose them. In Frankenstein's case, his hamartia is a composite of his hubris and the decision to reanimate the creature. This tragic error leads him to endure the burden of secrecy previously discussed. On the other hand, the creature's tragic error consists of his murder of William, which symbolized the creature's own loss of innocence, as he would continue on his path to revenge against Victor. The creature's hamartia resulted from his forced isolation and secretive lifestyle, as opposed to creating it, as Victor's did. From his birth, in quotation marks, the creature had no one to rely on or to form close bonds with, since the initial abandonment that Victor imposed on his creation deprived the creature of human contact and love which he deeply craved. Later on, as the creature attempts to reach out to others in search of acceptance, he is cruelly rejected by all he encounters. The creature thus resolves to hate Frankenstein for having abandoned him to fare on his own, and for not taking responsibility for his careless actions. This hatred manifests itself through the creature's murder of William, after which the creature exclaims that he too can create desolation, his enemy is not impregnable, this death will carry despair to Victor, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him. The toll that secrecy takes on the characters differs, as Frankenstein's taboo restricted him from speaking against Justine's execution, despite the fact that he told his family that he knew the murderer and that Justine is innocent. After Justine's execution, Frankenstein felt a weight of despair and remorse pressed on his heart. Nevertheless, he still kept his creation a secret. At various points in the story, Frankenstein succumbs to periods of illness often brought on from the grief and stress that his secret brings. Similarly, the creature suffers from the perpetual loneliness that results from having to keep his existence a secret. In conclusion, the duality exhibited, I'm struggling on this word, exhibited, thank you. The duality exhibited by Victor and the creature are both impacted by their secrecy. Victor's secrecy arose due to his fatal error of creating the creature and kept him from saving Justine at her trial. After having endowed the creature with life, Victor secluded a part of himself through his secrecy and committed selfish acts to retain the confidentiality of his scientific endeavors. The creature's isolation from society led to his loneliness, which in turn inspired his hatred towards Frankenstein and the subsequent revenge that he swore to inflict on his creator. The secrecy that occurred because of a creature's condition led him to commit the crimes that he did. Nevertheless, the creature also exhibits positive traits, such as an affinity for the natural world and a need for love. This reflects the notion that, at his core, man has a predisposition towards good, an idea popular among Romanticists, and that was propagated by French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Thank you all for listening to my presentation.
The next speaker is Nathan Bitgood. Nathan's research interests include the history of Shakespeare in performance and the religious and nationalistic elements of English Romantic poetry. He is currently teaching technical writing at Texas A&M University and preparing a dissertation on the function of bowers in the poetry of Leigh Hunt, John Keats, and John Clare. Note, we have another title change. Nathan is now speaking on the limits of nurture in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
And the mortal immortal.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it.
So the merits of Mary Shelley's short story, I'm not sure how many of you guys have read it, The Mortal Immortal, and its striking resemblance to Frankenstein are often noted by Shelley's scholarship, but almost never explored at any length, when the likes of Alan Roche and David Seed do deal with it. They often point out that The Mortal Immortal and Frankenstein both feature mad scientists and young heroes who ostracized from society, from society, flee across the continent and into the Arctic Circle. Another common observation is that both of these stories feature the medieval alchemist Cornelius Agrippa. In the novel, Agrippa is one of the 4 writers who inspire young Victor to pursue a career in the sciences. In the short story, in The Mortal Immortal, he is one of the main characters, a natural philosopher of the highest degree, and a figure whose idealized development as a scientist and a man make him an apropos foil to the unfortunate Victor. In this paper, I will compare Agrippa and Frankenstein extensively to the purpose of finding out the limits of nurture in the fiction of Mary Shelley. Now, the first encounter Victor has with the natural philosophers is as a young man. When perusing the family library, he happens upon a volume of Cornelius Agrippa, probably De Occulta Philosophia. A new light, he says, seemed to dawn upon my mind, and bounding with joy, I communicated my discovery to my father. Now, Alphonse, Frankenstein's father, or Victor's father, is not impressed. He says, "My dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash." But Victor is undeterred, and he continues to immerse himself in the secrets of the occult until a bolt of lightning reduces a tree not 20 yards from his house to a pile of smoldering ash. Now, a man of, quote, great research in natural philosophy happened to be staying with the Frankensteins at the time. And he explains to young Victor the theory of electrical grounding, as set down probably in experiments and observations on electricity by none other than Benjamin Franklin. On hearing how science, specifically the science of the Enlightenment, has unlocked the secrets of the natural world, Victor abandons alchemy altogether, saying, and I'm quoting here, "All that he said threw greatly into the shade Cornelius Agrippa, Albertus Magnus, and Paracelsus, the lords of my imagination." Now, the lightning-struck tree appears later in the novel, as some of you guys know, when Victor, weighed down by guilt and harrowed by his own creature, pines after the days of his lost youth, and he says, "During my youthful days, the study of what is excellent and sublime in the productions of man could always interest my heart and communicate elasticity to my spirits. But I am a blasted tree. The bolt has entered my soul. What I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of wrecked humanity." In his 2004 article, Composing What May Not Be Sad Trash, a reconsideration of Mary Shelley's use of Paracelsus and Frankenstein, the late Stuart Petterfriend creates a syllogism by which the symbols of the tree and the alchemists can be understood. And here it is. If the lightning is associated with the natural sciences, and the tree with the alchemists, and in chapter 19, the tree becomes Victor's soul, then the lightning is the science of the Enlightenment, and Victor's soul is tied to the medieval alchemists. After proposing the syllogism, Petterfriend's next move is to, as the title suggests, propose Paracelsus as the apropos foil to Victor's inhumanity. And this works for several reasons. In Aurora, or the aura of the philosophers, Paracelsus likens the soul to a tree and argues that one can only be a good alchemist or a good scientist if one is also a good person. While I can see how this similarity and others make Petterfriend think immediately of Paracelsus, I would argue that comparing Victor to Agrippa is just as, if not more, productive. Agrippa absolutely fascinated the Romantics. He is featured in William Godwin's novel, St. Leon, and also Godwin's nonfiction compendium, The Lives of the Necromancers, as an advanced, open-minded figure for the day. Samuel William Henry Ireland, the great forger, had a short story about the alchemist's dog who may or may not have actually been the devil. And Leigh Hunt's comic lyric, Cornelius Agrippa, is about the apprentice who, we're working for Cornelius Agrippa, finds an incantation for summoning the devil in the alchemist's study. Now, he actually accidentally reads this incantation out loud, then the devil appears, and not knowing how to carry on a conversation with Old Scratch, he pays for his mistake with his life. Now, Mary Shelley's short story, The Mortal Immortal, picks up immediately after the events of Hunt's poem. Agrippa, one apprentice short, is seeking out a young man. This young man is named Winzy, and he offers him a purse of gold if he will help him create an elixir of immortality. Now, that's not what he tells him the elixir is. In order to hide the true nature of his studies, Agrippa tells Winzy that the potion is a cure for love. Now, as it so happens, Agrippa doesn't know this, but Winzy and his beloved, his girlfriend Bertha, are in a rough patch. And so, wanting to be free of her, and from his desire for her, he drinks the potion when the alchemist is not looking. Now, it's interesting to note here that Winzy describes the bottle in which it bubbles as a, quote, globe of living radiance, lovely to the eye and most inviting to the taste. And when he drinks it, quote, glory and bliss bathe his soul in paradise. And keep your finger in that word, paradise. Now, what is reminded here of Victor's encounter with Agrippa's writings, which caused, as I quoted before, a new light to dawn upon his mind and his soul to bound with joy. All of this is well in keeping with Winzy's appraisal of the alchemist as one whose science is in full harmony with the human condition. At first, Winzy worries that the alchemist will be doing alchemical things, such as summoning demons, etc. But after an extended period of time working with him, he says that he was, speaking of Agrippa, a wise philosopher and had no acquaintance with any spirit but those clad in flesh and blood. His science was simply human science. So he's just so good at science. It looks like magic and freaks everybody out who sees him. Now, Agrippa's ability to forgive is one such example of his enlarged capacity for the human. Speaking of Agrippa here, on discovering that Winzy has destroyed the elixir, he, furious, grabs him by the throat and roars, "Wretch! You have destroyed the labor of my life." But this is the height of his wrath. After a moment, he, quote, grew calm, as a philosopher should, under the heaviest trials, and dismissed me to rest. Interesting enough, Winzy is not even fired for destroying the labor of Agrippa's life. And they continue working together. And in the end, they become fast friends. After his marriage to Bertha, Winzy, who had saved some money over time, quote, ceased to be the scholar of Cornelius, but continued his friend, end quote. And years later, when Agrippa is on his deathbed, Winzy is the only attendant at his cot. Now, the two present an affecting image here that Shelley gives us. As a ruddy youth sitting beside the bed of an old man, listening intently to his dying words. Now, this is the iconic image of a son at his father's deathbed. And those of you guys who've read Frankenstein see how this is important, especially with the question of nurture. But it is also important to note at this point that Winzy is as much Agrippa's monster as the creature of Frankenstein is Victor's. Now let me explain. The potion does grant him a few decades of unalloyed bliss. But when people start to notice that he isn't getting old, they stop buying the produce of his farm, and in time, his wife, Bertha, becomes indignant at being mistaken for his mother. After her death, Winzy himself becomes indignant, friendless, despondent. In his solitude, he says, "How many have been my cares and woes? How few and empty my enjoyments." He calls himself a sailor without rudder or compass, tossed on a stormy sea, a traveler lost on a widespread heath, without landmark or sail or star to guide him, a nearing ship, a gleam from afar. Some far cot may save them, but I have no beacon except the hope of death. Ironically, the potion, though not technically a cure for love, brings Winzy to the place where love ends. At story's close, he confesses himself suicidal and tells the reader how he plans to embark on an expedition. An expedition which, quote, mortal frame can never survive, to brave the powers of frost in their home. And he, does say that he might survive, and if he does, he wants to be recorded as one of the most famous among the sons of men. Now, Michael Sinatra sees this as nothing other than an expedition to the Arctic, connecting, therefore, Whinsey to the character of Walton, who also sets out in search of the Northwest Passage, or the North Pole. I also see the parallels between Whinsey and Walton, but in the former's resolution to, quote, yield this body, too tenacious a cage for a soul which thirsts for freedom, to the destructive elements of air and water, I hear an echo. And this is the echo of the monster from Frankenstein's promise to, quote, consume to ashes this miserable frame. Notice that even both of them, they resort to the same alienation of the third person. And I do not mean to say that Whinsey suffers as much as the creature. He does not. He is not abandoned at the moment of creation. He does not bear the guilt of 4 murders, or at least 4 murders, which the monster says poisons his heart with remorse. And neither is he denied the love of a mate. His marriage, up until the end with Bertha, is really happy. And he's not forced to watch a would-be darling dismembered before his very eyes, as the creature is. Whinsey receives all the love and nurture that the monster is so cruelly denied. And yet, at the end of both of their stories, we find them in the same place. They are both in the same place, not just emotionally, but geographically. Now, one possible conclusion that can be gathered from these similarities and these disparities is that love is overrated. I mean, I don't mean it quite like that, but Frankenstein's scholarship has, up until now, overemphasized the importance of nurture. As far back as 1983, William Wieder was remarking on how the major psychoanalytical readings of Frankenstein, like those performed by J.M. Hill, Gordon D. Hirsch, Morton Kaplan, Robert Kloss, Rubinstein, and so on, have overemphasized Victor's failure as a father and underemphasized his failure as a scientist. Implicit in such readings is the idea that the story would have ended more pleasantly, would have had a happy ending, or happier ending, if Victor had not abandoned his creature and instead raised it as a son. Now, this is a fantasy in which the monster himself indulges, saying, I ought to be thy Adam, in his meeting with Victor in the mountain. He's imagining a world where he and his mate, his Eve, would walk with their creator in the cool of the day. Now, for those familiar with the Genesis account or Milton's poem, Adam's stay in Eden is severely curtailed by fatal error. He and Eve eat of the forbidden fruit and are forced to trade immortality for early graves in the sweat of their brow. In The Mortal Immortal, though, Shelley gives us an Eden, actuated and not destroyed by consuming, by eating the forbidden fruit. Quote, earth appeared to be heaven, Whinsey says, as he sets out on married life with Bertha. The elixir, a miracle of mad science without any of the cruel inhumanity that made Frankenstein a staple of the horror genre, actually fails to save Whinsey from the same fate as the creature. In the August 19th letter, Victor prescribes a moral, an epigram for the story. He says, you may deduce an apt moral from my tale. Learn from me how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge. Now, a solitary reading of the novel calls this moral into question, and rarely does a lit class pass this sentence without the instructor calling Frankenstein's reliability as a narrator into question. But I would argue that when read in context with the Mortal Immortal, and the writings of Cornelius Agrippa, parallels begin to appear between Victor's pronouncement to the 3rd chapter of Cornelius Agrippa's book, The Vanity and Emptiness of Scientifical Advancement. In this chapter, Agrippa decries all arts and sciences as vanity and as striving after wind. He quotes the preacher from Ecclesiastes extensively. And he says, "It is an old opinion, and the concurring and unanimous judgment almost of all philosophers, that every science addeth to the sublime nature to man, himself according to the capacity and worth of every person." So science makes everyone's lives better. But Agrippa himself begs to differ. He says, "There is nothing more pernicious, nothing more destructive to the well-being of men or to the salvation of their souls than the arts and sciences themselves." And his reasoning is very medieval Catholic. He maintains that as humans, we have a sphere, and that we ought to stay within it, and not, quote, "dive into things beyond our own capacity, but only learn to know that which is only in our reach." In our reach to create, in our reach to maintain. And as any reader of the novel will tell you, Victor has a very limited reach when it comes to nurture. And yet, he persists in creating someone for whom he cannot care. Now, I agree, of course, that he should have found that capacity. He should have tried to reach out to his creation. That he should have forced himself to love the creature, and that he, Victor, is a monster for not doing so. But this is why I find a comparative reading with the mortal immortal so helpful, because it shows that the capacity to nurture is inherently limited, if by nothing else than the death of the nurturer. In this way, Shelley teaches us what environmental sciences have so recently learned, that our capacity to create far outreaches our capacity to sustain. The failure is not one of nurture, but of overreaching ambition. Or, if one prefers, overreaching ambition is the failure of nurture. Thank you.
So, our next speaker is Dr. Helena Halmari. Dr. Halmari is professor in the English department at Sam Houston State University, where she teaches linguistics and the history and development of the English language. Professor Halmari, whose research interests include language, context phenomena, pragmatics, and syntax, is the author of Government and Code Switching, Explaining American Finnish, and the co-editor with Tuija Virtanen of Persuasion Across Genres, a linguistic approach. Many of her articles focus on bilingual code switching, but she has also published on political rhetoric and language maintenance on the Alabama Coushatta Reservation in Livingston, Texas. Halmari's PhD is from the University of Southern California, and she has taught linguistics at the University of California, San Diego, Rice University, and the University of Florida, and Abo Akademi University, Finland. Since 2011, she has been the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Finnish Studies. She has also translated fiction from Finnish to English.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a privilege. So there's a handout, and it's going around, I guess. So in Shelley's novel, miraculously, the creature teaches himself language without a Berlitz French, which way do I? Yeah, without a Berlitz Friends for Travelers, or without Dabbles, Speak a New Language with Confidence software. The speed with which the creature learns language and the amazing level of his ultimate attainment boggle the minds of those of us who, after years of arduous study and lengthy periods of social immersion, still struggle with our foreign accents and grammatical idiosyncrasies. In his very first linguistic encounter with the old man de Lacy, the creature already passes as a native speaker after merely months of exposure and observation and no practice. Daisy asks the creature, and this is in the handout number 1, by your language, stranger, I suppose you are my countryman. Are you French? Never before having been engaged in a single conversation with a human being, the creature is capable of extraordinary complexity in his language. This is also on the handout. It doesn't show very well. It's the last page on the handout. So here is but one example of his sentences, a 36-word compound complex sentence. I have, unknown to them, been for many months in the habits of daily kindness towards them, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and it is that prejudice which I wish to overcome. This sentence includes embedded structures, clauses within clauses, prepositional phrases within prepositional phrases, and even the raising operation of a relative pronoun. How did he manage to acquire this level of competence, which Shelley conveys to us in English and not in the authentic French that the creature would have learned? Clearly, this must be fictional. In a sense, it's unfair to talk about fact versus fiction in a fictional book. Frankenstein is often referred to as science fiction, so what happens in the story and what could happen in real life is a moot comparison. Yet, licensed by Percy Shelley's sentence in his preface to Mary's book, number 3 in the handout, here I go anyway. Much of today's understanding of both first language acquisition and second or foreign language learning would predict a completely different outcome than attainment of full native-like competence, which the creature shows. But there may also be something else that a linguistic analysis might reveal, and which may support some critical interpretations of the creature as Victor's doppelganger, Victor's double. Mary Shelley was certainly cognizant of the realities of language learning, and this is reflected in the novel in a number of places. Victor Frankenstein, his siblings, and his friend Henri Clerval study multiple foreign languages, and Shelley is also aware of a side product of language learning, foreign accents. When Robert Walton and Victor Frankenstein meet at the frozen Arctic Sea, Walton immediately notices Frankenstein's foreign accent, but Frankenstein is fully fluent in English, and Walton praises his parlance. His eloquence is forcible and touching. Even the sailors feel the power of his eloquence. When he speaks, they no longer despair. Interestingly, also the creature is described as eloquent, and by Frankenstein himself, when he warns Walton about the creature's persuasive powers. He's eloquent, this is number 5. He's eloquent and persuasive, and once his words had even power over my heart, but trust him not. So how did the creature learn to be eloquent? Presumably as eloquent as Frankenstein himself. Note that we don't know whether the creature was first like a child learning his first language, secondly, an adult learning a foreign language without ever having learned a native language, so-called mother tongue, or third, would this be a rare case of first language acquisition as an adult or older child, like the case of Jeannie, the modern-day wild child who was discovered in Los Angeles in the 1970s. When on a dreary night in November, the creature is given life, he goes to meet his creator, who is dozing off. Victor reminisces in 6. His jaws opened and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. When human babies are born, they do not walk, so here the monster resembles an adult. Neither do babies talk within a few months from their birth, so here the monster resembles a baby. It's typically around 12 months of age when the average child starts to show the human traits of walking and talking. It seems that the language software had been erased from the creature's brain. Perhaps Frankenstein was able to activate a dead brain, get all the dead brain cells going, but not all of its functions. It seems that what we have here is an 8-foot-tall baby beginning to learn his first language. This is a strange combination of child language acquisition and adult foreign language learning, and because of the creature's deprivation of human contact, also a tragic case of a neglected young adult trying to acquire L1 without having learned it under normal conditions of language socialization. Frankly, he is not predicted to become the eloquent creature that he obviously is. So let's look at 5 well-known accounts designed to explain how toddlers acquire language. The first one is the so-called imitation theory. It's a layperson, quote-unquote theory, something that a person on the street would give as a reply to the question, how do children acquire language? The answer typically is that children listen to and imitate what they hear around them. When in volume 2, chapter 3, Shelley's creature tells his story to Frankenstein, he gives an account of his trying to imitate bird sounds. 7. Sometimes I tried to imitate the pleasant songs of the birds, but was unable. Sometimes I wished to express my sensations in my own mode, but the uncouth and inarticulate sounds which broke from me frightened me into silence again. Like a child, the creature begins his language acquisition process, reminiscing about his early times in the DeLacy cottage and hearing Felix read to Agatha and the old man. The creature recounts this experience like a baby. At the time I knew nothing of the science of words or letters. He continues to observe the DeLacy family and begins his conscious efforts to learn their language. This is a relatively long quote, but I'll read it anyway. I found that these people possessed a method of communicating their experience and feelings to one another by articulate sounds. This was indeed a godlike science, and I ardently desired to become acquainted with it. But I was baffled in every attempt I made for this purpose. Their pronunciation was quick, and the words they uttered not having any apparent connection with visible objects, I was unable to discover any clue by which I could unravel the mystery of their reference. By great application, however, and after having remained during the space of several revolutions of the moon in my hovel, I discovered the names that were given to some of the most familiar objects of discourse. I learned and applied words fire, milk, bread, and wood. I cannot describe the delight I felt when I learned the ideas appropriated to each of these sounds and was able to pronounce them. I distinguished several other words without being able as yet to understand or apply them, such as good, dearest, unhappy. The creature spends the entire winter learning language by mere observation and imitation. His situation is the same as that of any child acquiring its L1 or an adult learning a foreign language through independent study. It's an enormous task. A language one doesn't know is just a string of sounds. A beginning learner doesn't distinguish any words among that continuous string, and this is how the cottager's language sounded to the creature. But he was quite precocious. He had been created in November, and already after the winter he was picking up words. Of course, the higher cognitive skills of adults give them an advantage over children in foreign language learning, but only in the areas of syntax and morphology, not in phonology. But contrary to L2, foreign language learning literature, the creature was also able to pronounce the words in a native-like manner, merely based on imitation. As foreign accents are caused by speakers imposing their native language phonological patterns to their second languages, perhaps the creature was able to acquire perfect native-like pronunciation because he didn't have a first language interfering with his language learning process. In the area of lexical learning, as is the case of children learning their first languages, the context helped the creature enormously. Children's first words are always about the here and now. In the similar fashion, among the creature's first words are words that were connected to the concrete context: fire, milk, bread, wood. And as in the case of children, words for abstract concepts, good, dearest, unhappy, were learned later. Infants and toddlers are said to have the advantage when compared, an advantage when compared to adults. Children are typically not burdened by tasks of survival and can devote all their attention to deciphering the strings of sounds that they hear around them. The creature had a lot of this luxury, quote unquote, as well. He does his chores during the nights, and during the daytime he's able to focus on absorbing the cottager's language. As he says, I applied my whole mind to the endeavor. The imitation theory is accepted as only partially true by linguists. Of course, it explains the fact that we learn the language or languages that we are exposed to. For the creature to learn any words, he had to hear these words first in that initially incomprehensible string of sounds, because he, just like a human infant, is drawn to decipher language. He must be human. But the imitation theory alone cannot explain children's language acquisition. Toddlers make up their own endearing words such as sheeps for sheep and eat for ate. Children make errors that they have never heard and thus have not been able to imitate. Shelley's creature doesn't make errors in his language, he skips that phase. The creature also seems to skip the telegraphic phase of language acquisition, with mummy bag, cat sleeping, monster sad, where children communicate mainly by content words, leaving out function words and inflectional suffixes. From the one-word stage, milk, cheese, the creature goes directly to creating new unique sentences which he has not heard before and cannot have imitated. His first words to Old Man DeLacy form fully grammatical sentences in a target-like manner. 10 shows that unlike children, the creature uses all function words, they're in bold there, determiners, pronouns, prepositions, auxiliaries, conjunctions. The next theory, quite popular at its time, through the 1970s and 1960s and 70s. The reinforcement theory has its roots in behaviorism. This theory was proposed by B.F. Skinner, and according to it, human language is just another habit, and the complex task of language acquisition happens through positive and negative reinforcement. Children get positively reinforced when they pronounce target-like words, phrases, and sentences. However, language acquiring children get positively reinforced even when they do not produce any language. You throw a temper tantrum and you get a bottle of juice. But more importantly, few children are negatively reinforced when they fail to produce target-like forms. Adults tend to find these non-target-like forms very cute. In the case of the creature's language acquisition, this entire theory is moot. There was nobody in his life to give him either positive or negative reinforcement, regardless of his enormous efforts. Skinner's theory was brutally reviewed by Noam Chomsky, who in his own book, Syntactic Structures in the 50s, outlines his language acquisition theory, the active construction of a grammar theory. This is also called independent grammar's hypothesis, and according to it, children invent the rules of grammar themselves. A computer metaphor can illustrate this. Children, and it should be on the handout, 11. So children receive input data. This is the speech that they hear. They listen to these data and analyze them in order to determine a pattern. Because language is naturally patterned, a pattern evidently, inevitably, will emerge, and the child formulates a rule based on that pattern. At this point, we start hearing errors in the children's language because they are hypothesizing a quote-unquote wrong rule, eat it for ate, hit it for hit. Children continue to receive more linguistic input data and will eventually realize that these data don't match the rule they have hypothesized. They modify the rule or add another rule, and the final grammar will match adult grammar. Here, mistakes are expected to occur in children's language. Shelley doesn't report any mistakes in the creature's language, so comparison to his language acquisition pattern is moot here as well. In a short period, the creature has figured out all the target language rules so that the language he first tries out with the old man shows a full adult's grammar, even that of a highly literate person. Shelley also indicates that she was well aware of what linguists today call the critical period hypothesis or sensitive period hypothesis. In his letter to his sister, Walton laments the fact that he started his language learning too late. According to the critical period hypothesis, the window of opportunity for humans to be exposed to language is limited. This is why we as adults have such trouble trying to become fluent in foreign languages. Shelley's creature manages this task, however, and he manages it with an A+. So the proponents of the relatively recent connectionist theories of language acquisition focus on the neural side of language learning or learning in general. It seems that the creature's brain is definitely capable of forming new neural connections. It's a live, functioning brain. Miracle of miracles. The social interaction theory, this is the fifth one, is based on the teachings of the Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who, in contrast to Chomsky's active construction of the grammar theory, emphasizes the role of, well, social interaction. In social interactions, observations about language are shared between the child and the person the child is interacting with. Child-directed speech is slow and high-pitched. It contains simplified syntax, exaggerated intonation, and a simple and concrete vocabulary. Repetition is also extremely common in this register, and number 12 is an example from an elementary linguistics textbook of caregiver speech, or parentese. So this parentese register is not available to the creature because he is immediately abandoned by his father, like we hear. His creator, his parent, Victor Frankenstein, escapes his own quarters and leaves his creature to fend for himself on the night of his creation, thus depriving the creature from any social interaction, which would have included linguistic interaction. Like a baby, the creature attempts to coo and babble when he sees his quote-unquote parent. Frankenstein describes the creature's first vocalizations thus: he muttered some inarticulate sounds. But the creature doesn't get any feedback except that Victor Frankenstein flees. Perhaps we could call this negative reinforcement. Despite any positive social interaction, which Vygotsky claimed to be essential for language acquisition, despite the lack of this positive social interaction, the creature still learns. Shelley carefully plans the plot of her novel to allow the creature to learn a language. This language must be French, despite the fact that the creature's birthplace is a German town of Ingolstadt. French is the language of Frankenstein family, and later on the creature and Victor must be able to communicate for the plot to develop. After the creature has been taking language lessons through observation for a while, Saifi, the young Arabian woman, is introduced so that the creature can have a more formal language learning experience and audit in a classroom setting, except that he's really outside the classroom and not participating in any way. Again, this shows Shelley's understanding of the language learning process. Some formal instruction typically speeds up the adult learning process. Schumann, in 1976 already, presents several conditions for an ideal language learning situation for migrants, for instance. One is the social distance between the migrant group and the majority language group. The smaller the distance, the easier it is to learn the majority language. For the creature, the social distance is, of course, huge. There is no connection to other speakers. His language learning effort should, in theory, be futile. However, he possesses something that pushes him forward, and that is motivation. He tells his story in 13. I imagined that day the cottages would be disgusted until by my gentle demeanor and conciliating words I should first win their favor and afterwards their love. These thoughts exhilarated me and led me to apply with fresh ardor to the acquiring the art of language. L2 researchers identify two types of motivation: instrumental and integrative motivation. The creature's need to be accepted by the cottagers provided him with an immense source of integrative motivation. However, the creature's language learning process exhibits a severe case of what linguists refer to as limited input. He hears the language of only 3 people and few others. From these meager bits and pieces, and against all the odds, the creature is able to put together the eloquent and persuasive language that he shows. During the first verbal encounter between Frankenstein and the creature in the Chamonix Valley, the creature's language is complex, eloquent, and calmly persuasive. Here he's actually more eloquent, and I don't know if that shows, more eloquent and far more composed than Victor. He speaks more than Victor, his sentences are longer than Victor's, and his discourse turns are nearly 4 times as long as Victor's. Victor resorts to short exclamations like devil, wretched devil, abhorred monster, and imperative sentences like begone, vile insect, begone. The creature uses mostly declarative sentences, and if he resorts to imperatives, he pleads calmly for Victor to help with the combined promise. So here's the distribution of sentence types. So he pleads calmly for Victor's help with a combined promise like, make me happy and I shall be virtuous. Again. The creature even tells Victor, be calm. He calls Victor by his name, Frankenstein, and refers to him as my natural lord and king. This, of course, is more effective persuasion than Victor's rage. The creature is not only competent in grammar, he's also a skilled rhetorician. Who does this remind us of? What is Shelley's message about the nature of the creature? Shelley's book is not really about linguistics or language acquisition, while she knows, while she knows about the topic, she's not interested in it. Her interests lie clearly more in theology than in linguistics. Shelley paints a picture of the creature with feelings and emotions like humans. He has a conscience like humans, and he ends up having language, not just communication, but human language. Just like in Genesis and in Milton's Paradise Lost, Adam is gifted with language from the beginning. He is a sophisticated adult with language, just like what the creature quickly ends up being. By giving her creature human language, Mary Shelley makes him into Frankenstein's Adam. Like Adam was an image of God, the creature is Frankenstein's image, a combination of good and evil. Victor's pretty face with an ugly and troubled soul, the creature's ugly face combined with an initially good soul. This is God and this is Satan, another eloquent and persuasive creature.
Okay, now we'll open up the floor to questions. Try not to neglect anyone here. So, I guess I'll start with one. Do you think the creator-creation debate relates to the science versus humanity questions surrounding the novel?
What do you mean by that?
Because, I mean, early science fiction tries to split, kind of like Agrippa did, that science works against the best interests of humanity.
Oh.
And
Yeah, Frankenstein, like the way that Mary Shelley wrote it, like it's definitely a warning, like against going too far science. Is that what
that's
you're saying? Like
yeah, that's the
Yeah.
general. Yeah, that's what the general early science fiction tries to. That's the project of it.
Yeah.
So
So sorry,
yeah.
So you do talk about Plutarch. Now, I'm not familiar with him except for the lives. What was his position on what science he was exposed to in the sciences?
I'm not very familiar with Plutarch either. I just know lives. I did some research on lives for this project because it appears in Frankenstein, and it's obviously an important text to Mary Shelley and an influential text at that. So, but other than that, Plutarch, he lived way in the past, wrote his book, and not too sure how science really impacted his life.
So going back to the Agrippan thing. So because the early romantics were so fascinated by Agrippa, it seems like criticism is kind of the early romantics and early science fiction kind of mirrored that sort of science versus humanity outlay. How do we get past that, so to speak?
I'm not entirely sure that we can. Bring up drones in any group of friends, and you're going to encounter a wide variety of approaches to current technology. I really enjoyed a class I took last semester with our dear Dr. Pilshire, in which we discussed the ways that infrastructure does not necessarily improve the human condition, but mirrors it and replicates it back to ourselves. So that making something cool that allows humans to become more independent does not change who humans are, but rather creates a doppelganger of what humans are. And I think you can't ask for a spookier, more affecting doppelganger than the monster. So no, we don't get past that. We're going to be having the same conversation 200 years from now. When we, the second Shelley bicentennial. If we make it that far.
I have
Yeah,
a question
go
for
ahead.
Dr. Helmari. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, Helen.
Or Helen. So what do you think is the importance of the monster, or the creation, if you will, being able to watch language being learned or even produced? Because it's not as if the monster is blind and listening to language. Do you think that impairs him or helps him to watch how even the mouth is performing language? We all know, like, tongue placement and, you know, even lip placement and everything is very important.
It helps enormously because he's basically watching all the different sub areas of linguistics, of how languages are, you know, you use phonetics, phonology, you put more things together to form words, and then words to form sentences. But he's also absorbing pragmatics, how people use that language. So he's observing everything. What is just really amazing is that he is able to start producing it just based on that, and of course that is fictional.
Do you think that would be why Mary Shelley probably puts him in a place where he has a hole in the wall rather than just being able to listen to it, like underground or something?
He can observe. He can see how language is actually used. Yeah, it helps enormously.
Could you make the reverse argument? His ability to be so perfect in his language learning is, say, not so much a creation of, you know, turning Frankenstein into his Adam, but it would just be a way of showing how inhuman the monster is. This is more of a, it's more of a critical linguistic play.
Yeah, he is, I mean, there have been questions about whether he is human. Absolutely. He is human because he has these features of characteristics of what are inherently human. Only humans have language. Other non-human animals, all of them, of course, communicate by using a language. And he understood immediately that this is significant. That the humans he's observing, they use this weird code to communicate.
That reminds me of an idea I was exposed to about how Adam and Eve had access, or this was like an idea. This is a thing that was expressed to me at a different time. That Adam and Eve had more access to their brain and the brain power and all such things, and that was supposedly taken away after being booted out of Eden. And so it makes me think about how in this it seems almost like Victor may have unlocked something else in the creature's mind that would allow something like that.
He has superhuman. I'm saying he's human, but he has superhuman powers. He's stronger than an average human, and that doesn't come from his being 8 foot tall. So there is this superhuman element.
I'm interested in Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, The Sorrows of Young Werther. We have, I'm assuming, a Latin book, a German book, and an English book found in a satchel.
All in French translation.
All in French translation. And his style, the creature's style of speech is eminently Miltonic.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I was wondering, this is a question I should have asked years ago when I was taking your linguistics courses. My professor.
One of the best.
Are speech patterns taken from what we hear exclusively, or can we change the way we talk, all without noticing, by what we read?
I think we are definitely, nurtured by what we are exposed to, and that's why all the English teachers tell their students read a lot and read a wide variety of texts, and your vocabulary, not only the vocabulary enhances, but you also acquire an intelligent way of talking about things. So I absolutely, I believe we can discuss this, but I think we're definitely, everything we experience, it builds those neural connections. More of them alters them and so on. So we learn.
So maybe we can attribute that high competency more to the books than to the lessons.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Even though it would also be a miracle.
Many miracles.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys all coming out. And I'm gonna do a little drawing real fast with everybody who entered gets a shirt because that's what happens. Pierre, you get a shirt.
Hey.
Katie Nasser, you get a shirt. Cameron Criswell, you get a shirt. Henry Granger, you get a shirt. So meet me in the back in a second. I'm about to. We have fresh coffee, some iced tea, some cookies. We're just feeding you forever today. So we still have lemonade. Like we got everything.
Oh, no, thank you. I missed over too.
There's a whole lot of problems.
I know, but it's, you know, it's like a hard drive. I keep saying that. If you start a hard drive after 10 years, it's still gonna work.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you have to do recording. So it's like that's the other thing. All right.
Yeah, it's a boring. Sidetrack, not just track.
I don't know, like, I did some research on Frankenstein and I was right and I just like, anything about secrecy, like about the creature, like lives fully in secrecy. Frankenstein like doesn't speak out with Justin's Trout, which is like a major fucking concept.
It's just surrounded by
Because of his secret.
When the enlightenment,
So I just wanted to
figures out
delve into why.
there's success. We're just not he worked for one.
Yeah, that's.
And now it's working all
yeah,
over
it's the whole
Europe.
thing with like
And
society.
so the idea that you would go back to those guys who,
The fact that they're not
would extort money
the creatures don't
in
exist.
Europe.
They're very, very
Just give me another month and I'll buy you glasses.
really on society. Society's this.
Pierre, do you want a medium, large, or extra large?
Large, please.
Okay.
If society's an island over here, I think creatures are yeah, he's just, he's gone. He's so separate from society, that's what I meant when I was saying his he wasn't in society, we're pushing further to be outside.
But the
They don't
culture
really have
without
an effect on him because society's so far.
failure, destruction, and sadness and tragedy and falsehood.
Yes.
It just sticks with them.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, that is what
There's the whole
when I was again reading it before, you know, this
good
fall.
nature of man, it's like the sort of whole thing. The creature where it's described as being good, but how it's ruled in nature, because when the first
They're really bright.
is born, I
Yes.
don't know.
I've done that.
It's like stuff so big that like,
He's just a
brought to
wonderful
life.
person.
It's described that he has like, he just needs like full on affection.
Which is,
He's not delicious. It's like,
he's talking about your reality,
the
creating
whole idea that man is good and like
positive
all that.
belongs to
I don't like drink. I'm not sure how well I did. Yeah. If I could do this again, I would. I would edit some stuff. Yeah. was a good practice. I've never done one of these, so, yeah.
Oh, you're okay.
Yeah.
Because they were big
Some
and
experience here.
they were
I've never
kind of
cheered.
like,
Really? Did you learn to do like tennis and stuff before?
it was
I just-
finishes.
Experience doing this.
And I don't think they were really.
She's something weird keep
Especially at the right.
That's just
right
very,
sounds.
very and getting all mixed up, which is,
Yeah. Right, it's your.
No, I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna do it.
He's,
We also want mom.
But I also want to listen.
and that is the opposite.
It's Google?
Yeah, no, it's not even Google, it's just,
Oh, why did I get on?
it's just a.
Yeah.
and not
And one thing I think is
And not too chill.
is that Agrippa,
Something sweet, I should say.
even though he writes, he says, he should stop.
Frank, you decided to have to-
He just goes back to work the next day.
I just need to make sure that players know.
With the, yeah.
I'm not a student of linguistics at all.
Yeah, you're first anyway.
Yeah, but I learned a lot of it. If you've ever, there's a great, we talk about social interaction.
Hi, nice to meet you too.
Oh, really? Yes.
Does it work?
Yeah, I'm good.
And you're all set?
Yes. Yeah, I just have.
Do you guys need any water or anything?
No, I'm just gonna sip on this, so this will be fine. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it's really great. I asked this thing also about this is awesome. To wash these jeans. No, I was doing it. Yeah, we can. You're fine. Yes. Okay. Yeah. But just the idea of somebody else signed
Right, and I just think we're so stuck in the science is bad, science is good. But it's just, what is your capacity?
I know.
You know, and just asking that question for you, well, what is your capacity to sustain? Which is what scientists have failed to ask, what industrialists have failed to ask themselves.
You may think that one was,
They're not as separate as they are.
Right,
Sure, I have a
right.
couple
Yeah, that's why I
problems.
wanted to be the same thing. Capacity versus, and you see condemn families that have kids. And I'm gonna ask the same question. You know, his failure is overreaching, it's overreaching his own.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you liked it. Yes.
You always worry about these sort of things, right?
Yes.
Well done. Hold on, sir.
For a second.